Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Adecco Group UKNI's COVID-related webinar series called Insights in collaboration with our sister brand Penna. Over the next few weeks, we will continue to kind of share our insights and experiences of navigating this pandemic as the Adecco Group. For this episode, our focus is very much on talent, be it job seekers, colleagues being redeployed, or those having to change the way they work, and employers who are having to recruit vacancies, understand how best to communicate with an external audience, and also source and attract the right talent. My name is Sandeep Bandel. I'm the Head of Sales Solutions and Strategy here at the Adecco Group. Joining me to share their observations, recommendations on how to reimagine the way we attract and communicate and hire the future candidate are two lovely people who I've worked with for a very long time. First of all, Susie Smith, who's the Executive Director at the Adecco Group, where she focuses quite heavily on global accounts. And also Tristan Mokes, who's the Strategy Director at our sister brand, Penna. Good afternoon to you both.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for joining me. Before I dive into questions and start a healthy debate with you both, I'd like to remind anyone who's watching this now, you're watching it live on the 15th of May. So we've included the option for you to ask questions via slido.com using the hashtag #taginsights. There are two ways to access Slido: by either downloading the Slido app or simply searching for slido.com through your web browser. And again, for reference, entering hashtag #taginsights to enter your Q&A section where you can ask and or like somebody else's question. So now I'm going to dive into some questions, and Tristan, I'm probably going to come to you first. And you and I, even kind of before COVID, were talking about the world of work and how it was changing. Now, due to the pandemic we're going through, it's an unexpected change, and a change that is rapid, to say the least, and one that we've been forced into, but now that we're kind of responsible for reimagining what our future work truly looks like. I think for me, this is even more important if you think about the economic slowdown and the kind of slow recovery that we're going to be going through. It was very much positioned as a V-shaped recovery, but economists are very much saying it's going to be much more slower than initially expected. And we're seeing businesses suffering, but others having to diversify their business models, usage of supply chains, and most importantly, their workforce. And the Bank of England, again, announced a quite bleak forecast last week with the potential of unemployment rising to 8% in the next few months. That's the lowest since the financial crash of 2009. So the importance of employer brands and employer communications is even more important now than ever before. In my opinion, companies need to reset their boundaries, amplify their renewed purpose, and not see employer brand as a one-dimensional tool that is very much only for a permanent workforce, but really for the broader talent that they are looking to communicate, work with, manage internally or otherwise. So Tristan, after that wasn't your question, by the way, but your question really is, what do we mean by employer brands now, and how are we reimagining this essentially for a world which is going to have a higher dependency on the contingent workforce?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's always good to start in any discussion around this to kind of distinguish the terminology around employer brand. So employer brand, what it really means is the perception that exists out there, whether it's externally amongst candidates or whether you're within your own workforce, about your organization and what it means to work there. So even a company that never advertises or does anything will have an employer brand, whether they like it or not. So it can be a mixture of all sorts of things. It can be positive, it can be negative, it can be unheard of. And then what you do as an organization to in particular communicate, but also the actions you take will have an impact on that employer brand, making it better known, making it more favorable, and hopefully making it more attractive in most instances. Yeah, I think a lot of times the conversation about employer brand is about permanent attraction, permanent recruitment. That's where most of the attention and focus is, but obviously it has implications elsewhere. I think right now one of the big ones is on retention, and how employees right now are feeling about where they're working, how they're being treated, how they're being communicated with. And we're seeing a lot of organizations having to learn really quickly about how to do this, not only in tough economic times, but also just the changing work environment, which is different now in every industry. And I think equally, as we look forward, is where it might become more relevant in sort of more contingent spaces as well. So as companies adapt temporarily to this situation, there's going to be a need to think about engendering perhaps loyalty amongst individuals who may be a sort of a temporary workforce that may go and work elsewhere for a period, but you obviously want them to come back when things change, and you may also want individuals who are working for you now to kind of consider their long-term options as well. So I think right now is a real learning exercise for organizations, and so one of the things they're having to do is test things out and see what happens, because the rule book is really being rewritten.
Yeah, I think you're right. And as I said, we've been talking about the idea and the concepts of employer brand, employee communication, kind of really being used within that temporary gig economy contingent workspace. And, I was listening to the FT were doing a global boardroom over the last few days. And one of the chaps on there called Daniel Susskind, who we've done some work with at the Adecco Group, was talking about the future of work after the coronavirus. And one of his quotes was, one of the consequences of the crisis is that there'll be a lot less resistance in working differently in the future. And he gave lots of different examples in terms of doctors using virtual, doing diagnosis over video and other things, and kind of bringing that back into employer brand again. It's and communication. I think people now need to start think differently, where they try to justify why it was only kind of there for a singular purpose. It is very much there for many other reasons. But there also needs to be a balance about how to use that communication in this environment, because you and I again have spoken many a time over the past few weeks about how in the consumer market people are using the kind of the crisis and the pandemic to communicate out to their audiences, and some are getting it very right and some are getting it very wrong. So what kind of recommendations would you have in terms of how we manage this in terms of the kind of contingent gig workforce?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the starting points is going to be remembering that the actions are more important, arguably, than words in this situation. So whatever an organization is doing, the starting point should always be, what are we actually going to do for people? And then the communication should really follow that. So if you kind of look at maybe somehow how some consumer brands are tackling this sort of thing, there are some bad examples where you might have seen some advertising that has run that may have capitalized on the current climate a little bit, trying to kind of piggyback on sort of goodwill towards the NHS and so on, or trying to kind of send an authoritarian message about staying home where it's not really their place. And some of the best ones have really been organizations. I think the example that stands out most for me is Mercedes Formula One, who didn't really sort of think necessarily about having to communicate, but just got on and repurposed their engineers to design ventilators that actually worked. There's two great things about that. One is for people who work there, how brilliant is it to know that your employer has values that are meaningful and that you're able to kind of turn your attention to actually doing some good. But also the PR that just led to will probably last them quite a while in the sort of employment space as well. So there's some interesting examples out there of how companies are doing it. But like I say, I think that the key is figuring out first what you're doing, what action you're taking, rather than just trying to invent a message.
And the importance there, and we'll come back onto this, Tristan, a little bit later, but I think it's really key to kind of manage the message now, is that we're not talking about creating something complete or large or permanent. This is also about how we're reacting to situations and communicating through different mediums throughout the change that we're going through, and that will need adapting and kind of developing as we kind of move on. But we'll kind of come back to that, because I wanted to bring it back to our own experiences, if that's okay for a minute. And just sticking with you, Tristan, before I move on to Susie. And, you know, our own experiences here at the Adecco Group and Penna is that, as many other businesses have had to, we've tapped into the job retention scheme too. And some of our workers have had to be furloughed. And Tristan, if you don't mind me sharing, you have recently come back off being furloughed. And the reason I'm kind of picking on you and talking about this is the importance of employer brand and employee communications is not only for the talent external, as I mentioned right at the beginning, it's also about how we're managing our internal talent and talent that's moving around the business or being reskilled or being, you know, reappropriated into different roles. And can you just kind of give us a bit of insight, because we should be practicing what we're preaching, what we've done as a business in terms of your experience of being furloughed over the past few weeks, and how have you found that in terms of connectivity back into the business?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a good example, I suppose, furlough situations that a lot of companies might go through, where their relationship with employees might be more fluid. You know, in the long run, it might be that they have individuals that are kind of part of a network rather than necessarily, you know, sort of full-time permanent. I would say what's been particularly interesting for me is that the stuff that's been put in place, the changes, the technology and so on, I would describe these as largely trends that should and probably would have happened anyway, but this has really just been kind of a catalyst to that. So, you know, one of the things that we did is, I mean, obviously, like everyone, we embraced Teams a lot more as a way of keeping in touch with wider networks, wider groups within the organisation. But we also sort of set up, you know, sort of dedicated platforms that focused really on being able to communicate with staff, keep them engaged, and try as best as possible replace some of the, you know, the real world experience you get in an office, and sort of, you know, having a chat in the kitchen and sort of talking about what was on TV last night. So remembering that it's not all about you know, your day job. There is a relationship side to it as well. It's never going to be perfect, but we're sort of learning week on week how best to do that with people who are kind of spread around their individual houses. But like I say, I think that the main thing to take away from it is that if it's a trend, or if it was a trend before, and I think this was, then it's one that will probably continue and last beyond the current situation.
Great, thanks, Tristan. And I know, you know, we've been doing a number of things that we kind of mentioned in a previous webinar around mindfulness and communicating with the broader teams, regardless if they're active or on furlough. So there's a lot of work that I know we've been putting in place that we're quite proud of. Susie, moving on to you. So just wanted to kind of hear from your perspective, you know, with your kind of client hat on and the kind of household names that you work with. What sort of trends are you seeing in the economy, and what sort of behavior are you seeing from clients at the moment in terms of the type of recruitment that they're doing? Because there does seem to be a shift from perm recruitment, understandably, due to the current kind of environment we're in. But what sort of behavior are you seeing from the different industries that you've kind of come into contact with?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's been really interesting. I mean, like we said, I mean, unprecedented is such a used word at the moment. We are living in these unprecedented times. And I think the impact that has had on our world as recruiters, but equally how we then partner with our client organisations has really started to shift quite seismically. So what I'm seeing from a global standpoint is we've got organisations now looking at us to help them in a very much a social contract way. So, you know, you've got a big downturn in terms of demand. As you say, permanent recruitment, a lot of roles have gone on hold, just why organisations reevaluate what their mid and long-term strategy looks like. What we have seen is some acceleration around, to Tristan's point, some acceleration around strategies that would have been deployed maybe in 3 to 5 years' time with upskilling or reskilling. And I very notably point this towards kind of production manufacturing, whereby they're taking people now and looking at reskilling and putting them into more data-centric roles that will still inform the production and manufacturing components of their business, but just in a completely different way. So that acceleration is leading to organisations being much less risk averse, which is great, and moving at a rapid pace. on the flip side of that, like I've said, is organisations looking at us to support them to help some of their workforce to find alternative work whilst they're experiencing a downturn. So we've actually just launched a job portal with Uber last week, which is doing exactly that. So, you know, as you'd expect, you've got a whole load of drivers, whether they're rides drivers or eats drivers at the moment, who are seeing a significant downturn in terms of their work, but they still need to work, right? So we've partnered with Uber just to enable individuals to find alternatives. But, you know, it's not about the commercialism of this. It's about doing the right thing genuinely, and ensuring that people are feeling that they have got a support mechanism around them and that they understand exactly what is happening, why, how they reach out to new opportunities, but equally how they reach back into their parent organisation, if you want to call them that. And I think from that perspective, that's given me a real insight into the way that employees are feeling at the moment, but equally the way that some employers are starting to shift their game in terms of the values that they have, their core values, and really standing up against those and actually being able to portray that in some of the behaviours that they're undertaking. And I think, you know, the nature of that is then meaning that I am seeing, excuse me, quite a different communication style out of some of these organisations. So, yeah, I don't think this is going to go away overnight. I think some of these projects and programmes will continue to come in at us. And I welcome it. I think, you know, having that different dynamic of working with an organisation, being able to consult with them in a much wider spectrum than just recruitment, because there's so many facets that then lead to ultimately a job role being open, it is a very welcome thing. And we can help those organisations navigate through the shift in the type of demand they're seeing, whether it's, you know, a shift from permanent more towards temporary stroke gig economy type workers. We can help them to understand how to engage, attract and talk to those communities.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And before I kind of continue, I just want to remind everyone who's watching this live, please do kind of ask us questions on slido.com and go to #taginsights to ask any questions that you have. And to your point there, Susie, it's you know, to say it's a volatile market is an understatement right now, because you know, even when you are seeing green shoots in certain areas, you are also seeing some companies having to kind of slow down or actually strip back. So VW obviously announced in Germany, for example, only yesterday, that the workers that they had to put into their plant, 8,000 workers that went in, you know, all under the social distancing protocols of the local government, are having to slow down and potentially shut down their practices because there isn't enough demand, particularly in the European markets, for their kind of for their vehicles. So it's kind of ever changing, and that kind of again leans very much towards the dependency on the kind of temporary and gig economy marketplace, but also our responsibility as recruiters, supporting employers out there about how they should be communicating with employees or potential talent. So the Uber example that you gave is actually really interesting, because you have it's a gig style job. You have a variety of people that can go into many different roles and disciplines, and some of these individuals do it as a part-time job. So, you know, with that, what sort of kind of services have we provided in that case in terms of supporting them with their upskilling, kind of CV writing? Have we provided those sorts of guidance and support so they can navigate how to potentially apply for a temp job or a contract job?
Yeah, so what we're doing at the moment is we are in a phase whereby a lot of them are just coming through and understanding what these role types are at the moment. So I would call it an education phase, but absolutely these are all available to them. So as time goes on and we start to get more predictable data around what individuals are looking for, what's important to them, and obviously, you know, where people's value system is at the moment is quite different to where it was. So we just want to make sure that, yes, we can give them the obvious tools like CV writing, interview tips, etc., and all of that is available. But there may be other more well-being type offerings that we can look at doing in partnership with Uber as well. So all of this is on the table for discussion. And like I say, there's other organisations as well that we're talking to about the same thing. So I think that offering will continue to grow, and some of it will become quite formal in time, as we expect from some of the conversations we're having. And that's where we start to obviously engage with, you know, some of the other group brands that we have, like the LHHs, etc. but yeah, I mean, it's like I say, the social contract element of this at the moment is so significant. Doing the right thing by these people, supporting them in the right way, it is what is the material difference between the way it was before it is now. And I think that, you know, we will continue to give those offerings and support those individuals.
I think you're absolutely right to bring up the social contract. It's probably more important now than ever to make sure that, yeah, there's real purpose and importance focused around that. And on the kind of couple of examples that you gave there, the interesting element of employer brand and employee communications within the temporary workforce, it's also coming together with this kind of unseen phenomenon of large competitors now coming together and working collaboratively, like never before. And I'll come to Tristan on that in a moment, but in kind of the recruitment world, we're seeing that, Susie, in for example, you know, the Ubers and many others who are saying, right, we've got in-demand talent right now, or we want to loan our talent, sorry, to demand companies. Let's get together and kind of share the opportunity and create a community online where people can learn about what another partner organization can offer. And again, that's never been really seen before at this scale. So employer brand's got this connectivity, not just across to the external market, but as a bridge across to another partner organization who's recruiting.
It's been amazing. I mean, it's really good that you raised that, actually, because we had a very interesting conversation, didn't we, last evening, which was exactly that, where you've got organizations who are in some cases fierce competitors, who are now working alongside one another with real authenticity, with real belief in what they're doing the right thing, and seeing some real positive outcomes as a result of that. And like you say, I just think that it's refreshing for one, and it's a privilege to be involved in that for sure. But the other thing I see is that I don't think this will go away. I think that this will continue, and I think it should continue. If you think about, you know, what the outturn of this scenario is going to look like, we will still be operating in restrictions from a mobility sense, internationally, but we still have scarce skills challenges to address. So I think this kind of workforce sharing, the exchange, whatever you want to refer to it as, will continue in some way, shape or form. But it's these times now that are helping us to kind of formulate exactly what that looks like, and how we manage it moving forward. Because equally, you know, from an employee perspective, it's great to feel needed and wanted at times like this, where you might feel a little vulnerable, but equally you need to ensure that you've got all of the infrastructure around them to feel that they are moving through jobs in a way that is still feeling like it's career progression for them. So yeah, I think this is the embryonic start of something new, which is really exciting.
I couldn't agree more. And there was, again, a lovely quote that I saw in the FT boardroom yesterday, another quote, which was really around how employees are treated today will have a significant impact on companies' future fortunes. And I think that was so neatly put together, that organizations now have a duty of care, be that for their internal employees or those that they're bringing on a temporary basis,
for sure,
or those that they're letting go. And I'll share something with you both that I received yesterday, which was a kind of a note from a colleague about Airbnb, who are doing a fantastic job of employee communication, where they've set up a number of online pages to promote people who are departing their business due to the current pandemic, and launched an alumni talent directory where they are evangelizing about the incredible talent that they've got, that they unfortunately having to let go, and hopefully can hope to find a home for these individuals so they can continue in their working journey. And you know, that is another great example of how you transition people, but again, employer brand and communications is very much at the heart of that. And Tristan, kind of coming to you just about how companies are coming together and working together like never before. I know you had a few examples and thoughts on that too.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think it's one of the sort of interesting things, again, to sort of observe is how everyone's kind of reacting to the crisis. I think anytime you've seen something like this in a movie or on TV, it's you know sort of cars on fire and shops being looted. But what's been really good is to see that the positive way that not just individuals but companies have reacted. The most high profile one is probably Google and Apple, kind of fierce rivals, actually just getting together very quickly, collaborating on a technical solution to kind of help the tracing services that a lot of governments will need to do and hope to use smartphones for. And that's a real rarity. And I think, you know, will this last beyond the crisis? No one really knows for sure, but I think, you know, there'll be small benefits they gain from, again, the people working there, their existing employees seeing, you know, a good thing that's been done. You know, they put aside differences because they focus on what's really important, and that will add to their the goodwill that they feel from their current employees and potentially future ones as well. And then I suppose as the kind of recovery happens and the change that might come in the economy, there are clearly benefits for every organization in pretty much every industry by collaborating a little bit to kind of understand that there may be great numbers of individuals who have traditionally done one thing, one type of job, have one type of skill set, but the need is now going to be elsewhere, certainly for the short term, possibly for the longer term as well. So that will mean potentially great numbers of people moving industry, and those in the destination industries may need to kind of get together to almost sell their industry and sell the opportunities that are there, and to kind of, you know, sort of mention retraining in people retraining in sort of data science skills, which again was a bit of a trend that was going on previously, but might have just been accelerated. There's going to be a number of employers out there, but, you know, do they kind of get together to kind of help advertise the career itself rather than just their company, and get the benefits jointly from that?
Absolutely. I think I'm going to go to some Slido questions because they are coming in. So we're going to switch screens and go to those now. But your point around the career, I think it's really about how you enable career progression for people, be it in your organization or another one. So that's really kind of interesting to see. So I want to come to a couple of these questions that have come up and kind of move away from the ones that I have and that we're debating is, have you seen a change in what job seekers prioritize as part of their needs when looking for a new job? Do these differ from perm and temp job seekers? I'll dive a little bit in there before I come to both of you. One of the things that I've seen very much data-led over the past 2 to 3 weeks is that currently, because the unemployment rate is rising and people are concerned about a future role, that they are much more broadly open to more opportunity and the variety of opportunity that is out there. And you know, Susie, we've seen this with, you know, the support that we're providing with the track and trace systems that the government are putting in to provide the people behind the scenes, and you know, the uptake of that. So I just kind of wanted to put that out to you based on what your experiences have been within that. I think normally longer term, we do tend to see a differentiation between the two, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I would pick up with what you've just said, particularly around the track and trace solution. That's been a real eye-opener for us, and also some of the programs where we've shifted to a fully automated online recruitment process. Is what we're seeing from a temp perspective is clearly people are still applying at pace. People are moving through the recruitment process a lot quicker, and the conversions are actually a lot higher. And I think that's because we've got a segment, we've seen, the data has shown us that we've got a segment of permanent candidates who are displaced, who are now coming into a more temporary led role, and they are much more open to just making very quick decisions, moving through at pace on these recruitment processes, and landing into an organisation feeling quite surprised at the comprehensive process that they've gone through and the care that they've been given. So I think from a trends perspective, yeah, you know, temp has always been quite rapid in the sense that, you know, you open a role on a Monday and it's fulfilled by a Friday, let's say. But we're now starting to see some of those trends being accepted by permanent candidates. And some of these permanent candidates are lifelong career candidates, i.e. they've never been in the temp market before. But the way that they're embracing these opportunities it is refreshing. I mean, and I think a lot of that is because of the times that we're living in at the moment, and nobody has the opportunity to sit for too long and to ponder on something because things are moving so quickly. So that has been quite interesting. And I think just because of the automation aspects and the fact that we are now using so many more dynamic channels to be able to communicate with, etc., I think people are much more willing to move at pace and not feel that they're being rushed so much.
Agreed, absolutely agreed. I think people are very much reacting and pouncing on opportunities right now, but they also still need to have that purpose and communication behind it. And I know the one that we just referred to was very clearly done in that sort of way. So absolutely agree. Tristan, just coming to you with the one on the top there, which is, what measures do you recommend to promote employer brand to employees who are recruited on a temp contract but having to work from home?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things that sort of come to mind in terms of, let's say the attraction side of trying to kind of find people. One thing is that there's probably going to be a little bit of a disconnect between the kind of things, the kind of jobs that people are looking for and the kind of jobs that might be available right now. And so we'd really sort of advise organizations to look at a greater range and diversity of kind of channels to attraction than they probably previously would have been using. So, some of the trends that we know are heightened, at least at the moment during this situation, is social media, which people are spending a lot more time on, which does present a good opportunity if you haven't already been making use of it to kind of reach out to individuals. Likewise, sort of video, where there are video advertising opportunities, is probably the one area that's had a genuine uplift in terms of ad spending. But I think more generally, from an actual messaging perspective, it's probably about just being very much upfront and straight talking in communications. So now's not really the time to try and upsell too much. It's probably the good time to be realistic with people, to kind of actually, as much as possible, acknowledge some of the drawbacks potentially, and some of the fear factors, and be reassuring at the same time. So again, if you look at sort of the consumer space, some of the kind of the advertisers that have started to stand out a little bit better have been the ones that have just had some very sort of straight talking, human sounding ads that have kind of reassured people about measures and safety in a very sort of down to earth way. And I think just finally, it's more important than ever to kind of to test things out, be prepared to adapt. Like I say, few people really have a rule book or a playbook for this kind of situation. That's being written as we go. So don't necessarily expect the first thing you do to work perfectly. Be prepared to sort of test things in a small setting, perhaps, adapt them, and continuously learn from experiences.
Absolutely. And just to add to that, I want to bring one of your personal experiences into that. So it is about test and learn, but also as you bring people in, and to that question, to kind of give it another angle about people who are working from home, be it on a temp contract, a freelance contract, or on a permanent basis even. One of the things that I know that you've done at Penna is create a dedicated site, which is now available for people who are working from home, which has content which is directly focused on the information that they would like to see and hear, in terms of communicating with them, connecting the business together. Isn't that right? Do you want to just start a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess once people are on board, that's certainly part of it, to kind of make sure that they feel part of the culture as much as possible. There are different approaches to it. Absolutely. One of the things that we've been trying out is a sort of a dedicated portal to kind of help people feel included and part of the organization. I think as well, getting people on board with a lot of the, I suppose, real-time communications tools that have really grown in the past year or so, and likewise been accelerated recently, have a really big part to play in that feeling part of things, and having close contact with your potential new colleagues and employer. So that's certainly a key part of it. And one of the things that's actually quite interesting about this is making sure that you kind of recognize that there may be a bit of a generation gap in the sort of the either the existing employees or some of the new ones who may be coming on board. And while you might see a lot of activity and engagement with some of these measures you put in, it's also possible for people to feel a bit left behind if they're not in their personal life particularly comfortable with all of the digital tools and techniques that we're using. So I think it's going to be really important for employers to kind of listen out for people who may be a bit quiet because they're just not comfortable in this environment. And you know, a really sort of healthy and thriving workforce has, you know, diversity not just in some of the better known senses, but in terms of generations as well.
Thanks, Tristan. There was another question that, Susie, I wanted to kind of bring to your attention from Slido. And that was going back to the Airbnb example. Do you think more companies will embrace a similar approach as we kind of face redundancies or changes in the workplace, just to extend to that question?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like I said, I think this will be a trend that will continue. I think, you know, that from the conversations I'm having with organisations, and I can only go from that as we stand, is I'm getting the distinct impression that they want more advice around how they can look to not just collaborate with recruitment organisations, but other organisations as well. They really want to understand what their workforce composition might look like if they have to go through release programs, reskill programs, etc., etc. So I do think that we will see similar approaches, but I think as organisations start to think more about their long term and how they want to protect some of those scarcer skills, it might have a little bit more sophistication around protection around certain skill sets, looking at investment in others, etc. So it's a real moving feast at the moment. So I am saying yes, I think it will continue, but I think it's going to change quite considerably.
Okay, no, great. I absolutely agree. So just kind of coming back to a few questions that I had and kind of the debate we're having. So when we look at employer brand and the implications it has for companies in terms of the kind of the comms and approach, what kind of suggestions would you have, Tristan, in terms of how they should kind of anchor that employer brand in terms of what's happening right now and the direction of travel where we're going?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the starting points is to kind of, first of all, really go back to your kind of values as an organization, and kind of take a long, hard look at them and make sure that they're still reflecting, you know, the way that that you're sort of reacting to the current situation and the way that employees are being treated. Hopefully they are, and that's when you know you've got your values right, is when you haven't really had to think about them, you've just got on with things, and it kind of rings true. I think what's going to be, you know, particularly key is making sure that, you know, like from a channel perspective, you're kind of using the sorts of routes to talk to your people that are familiar to them and are kind of clear and concise. And then I kind of just reiterate a point I made earlier is remember that when you're communicating, you're talking to people, you're talking to human beings. It can be easy to get stuck in this need to sound, you know, sort of legally accurate and very precise and not vague or anything like that. And that, you know, it is important not to be vague, but make sure that you still sound, you know, human when you talk to people and when you communicate with them, to kind of demonstrate that, you know, you've got sort of empathy for their situation, you do understand them, and you are trying to listen to them, because that can get lost as we sort of, you know, you try to kind of put things across that are, you know, potentially quite formal, because you want to make sure you don't sort of say the wrong thing.
Absolutely. I've got two more questions, one each for you, and I'll stay with Tristan and I'll come to Susie. So to wrap up, Tristan, from your point of view, what would you think kind of a mini campaign should look like for an organization in the current situation that we're in? What kind of hints and tips have you got in terms of what they should be doing with the type of audience that they are looking to advertise to, and also the talent that's available out there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the first thing I'd sort of say is that, you know, the caveat is that it would always depend on the organization and specific needs and the situation they're in. And when we work with clients, we'd always take a lot of time to kind of really dig deep and understand them. But I think there are some more general things that are more widely applicable. And some of this is kind of recapping a little bit, but one of them would be really from a channel perspective to kind of think a bit differently as to how you reach people. Some channels are now more relevant than others, and in a lot of cases, you're probably going to be wanting to reach out to a slightly different audience than you necessarily are used to talking to. So from an employer brand perspective, now is probably the time to embrace concepts like programmatic advertising, social media, and increasingly video on demand. Another would be, like say, in the messaging itself, to kind of be as straight talking as possible. I think people are anxious, and a lot of people are perhaps more cynical than usual. So I think it's important not to run the risk of being seen to pull the wool over people's eyes and to, like say, upsell things too much. So plain messaging, sort of clear and concise, is important. And then the final one again would be to start small. Perhaps pick a smaller pilot approach and just test it and adapt it as you go. I think it's something that, again, it's from a trends perspective, we would have always said is a good thing to do, but now more than ever, it really is the right thing.
I think organisations have the time to look at it as well with the level of attention it needs. So I think that's probably a positive for them to be able to execute on that.
Absolutely. And Susie, just coming to you, what do people want to hear about in the coming months as kind of employees or future employees or employers even, and what kind of information should we be pushing out there? And I know the Adecco Group, as an alliance with others, has done a bit of work behind this. If you'd like to share a bit more about that, and also how we're kind of adding to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually probably the most common conversation that I'm having at the moment is, thinking about what does safely back to work look like? What are the obligations that the employer has, and how are they going to look after me? And what are the considerations that I need to have that I might not have even thought of at the moment? So, we are working very closely, as you said, with Randstad Manpower. There's the HR Industry Alliance. So that is now in place, and we're going to be working with organisations to help to support them in working that through. And we've got open communication happening with organisations in and around London, some of the big cities in the UK that are now looking to repopulate buildings, and understanding how they're doing that. What are the protective measures that they're taking? What does that mean in terms of prioritisation of those individual functions that are coming back into work? And then equally, as things start to pick up, well, what does that then mean from a job market perspective? So which jobs are going to come back online before others? Will there be a shift? Will there be a trend shift in terms of what was perm, then becoming more temporary focused? Help me to understand what that might look like. And if we have seen more of this acceleration around reskill and upskill, then again, just working through with organisations to help them to achieve what that new workforce composition might look like. And then some of the short-term strategies that they might want to deploy around, like I say, whether it's reskill, upskill, but it might even be release as well. So, just working through with that. And I know that that's what we've heard from some of the employee forums that we've been doing with organisations as well. I think the other thing that's going to be on people's minds will be about skill sectors. So, we come out of the back of this, types of work have shifted, some of it in response to the pandemic, but others will shift as a result of the impact to the economy and the focus that we will need to take moving forward. And what will that skill shift look like? And then again, talking about going back to the scarcity of skills that I mentioned earlier, with a restriction on international mobility, how do we overcome some of those scarce skills challenges that we have, where we've typically brought in skill sets from other countries, etc. So I think these are all things that are on people's minds, and they're certainly the ones that I've been talking to most recently. And then in terms of, really going back to Tristan's point in terms of what's important to people as well is let's not forget that our emotional awareness as employers, but also employees peer to peer. As we all start coming back into the workplace, we're working now, but we're working in a very different environment. As we start to come back into work and the pace then changes, your focus changes accordingly. But let's not forget that COVID is still here. It hasn't gone away, and people are still affected by it. So just having that emotional awareness in the way that we communicate, and the way that we're messaging, and putting some formality around, I think will have to be something that's on our minds.
Absolutely well said, Susie. Thank you very much. We have had a number of other questions that have come through Slido, but I know we are running out of time. So what we are going to do is respond to those and attach those with the recording of this onto our social pages and also our website. For those of you listening, should you wish to if you need any further information or require any other insights in terms of what we are doing or thinking here at the Adecco Group and Penna, please visit our website, theadecogroup.co.uk, and please feel free to contact either one of us or all of us through LinkedIn. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you again to Susie and Tristan for being with me. Have a good weekend, stay safe, and bye for now.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.